Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. Joe, I wanted to kick off by asking you, why is biosecurity so important to Australian agriculture, and what value do we derive by keeping it intact?
Thanks, Tim, and good afternoon, everyone. I guess my heart and expertise sits within the red meat sector, and very importantly, I guess for an industry that is exporting 70% of its product overseas into more than 100 different markets, the ability for us to maintain, I guess, a really strong reputation in terms of food safety, biosecurity, product integrity is really central to our ability to trade successfully in all of those markets. It's important for, obviously, animal health. It's important for the productivity of our farms as well. But when it comes to, I guess, biosecurity, traceability, it's the vehicle that allows us to assure our customers that we have very robust systems in place that can underpin those market needs.
And Brian, do you see the risks of biosecurity or infringements on that to Australia increasing at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. And if you look across the world, the dynamics of disease spread have certainly changed. There's lots of pressures around trade. There's lots of pressures around movement of goods and people across borders. But it's something that we feel really ready for, because one thing about the biosecurity system we have in Australia is it's really robust. We have an excellent animal health system, and the reason that is because we have a really good partnership approach, and we talk about that shared responsibility, but it genuinely is about us in national government, across state and territory governments, with industry, with non-government organisations and the community, to make sure that we do maintain that animal and plant health status, because it's not just important for trade, which is predominantly what we're talking about today. It's important for social amenity. It's important not to have diseases that have impacts on people, on our biodiversity, on our agricultural sectors, and that's why it's so important that we are forward-looking and can manage some of the risks that are coming at us every day.
Yep. And Brian, you mentioned there that one of the reasons risks have increased is because there's more trade and more tourists coming in. What about the proximity of disease in our near markets?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about trade, of course. We are seeing the dynamics of disease spread change with climate change and other factors. We know that we've got diseases that are of interest to us, particularly foot and mouth disease, lumpy skin disease in our near neighbours. But also the challenge around things where managing those unregulated pathways, so pathways we can't manage through regulatory systems like migratory birds, has really challenged our thinking around how would we respond in the event of an H5N1 outbreak, what are the sorts of things we can do around preparedness, and how do we get that speed to action and speed to decision such that we can respond as best we can within the constraints that we have.
And all these factors that are increasing risk in terms of increased trade and arrivals, diseases and pests in our near neighbours, climate change, these apply to animal agriculture as well as plant-based agriculture as a broad brush?
Absolutely. The same challenges we're having on the animal front, our plant colleagues have as well, because it's really vital that we can have strong surveillance systems, so being able to detect things early, and then being able to do what we can to manage those outbreaks. I mean, we've got excellent systems in place, but it's only as good as how we can manage what's in front of us. And the other thing is about managing expectations too, because we don't live in a zero-risk environment. We live in a world where we have to be making decisions with imperfect information, with regulation which is challenging, with legislation. It's a hard environment, but it's all about going back to first principles about what's the best course of action, how do we make those decisions with the information that we have at the time to help manage some of these issues.
Yeah. Michelle, you spend a lot of time looking at wild birds, and without even looking at the interface with agriculture, has climate change impacted the diseases that they're picking up, or the way they show that, or migratory patterns? Are these things impacted by climate change?
Yeah, so of course, birds exist in an environment, and the climate really drives and dictates what they do. So for migratory birds, there's actually a lot of international discussion in the international community about changes in departure dates and arrival dates on these incredible long-distance migrations that they do. Within Australia, we have a really different system here where we, of course, have these wet years and dry years, and that also really drives what birds are doing. So in wet years, birds, for example, are widely distributed across our landscape, but in dry years, they're highly congregated. And of course, these kinds of things will impact the prevalence of various different diseases.
Yeah. Can I ask you to give us a flavour for a migratory bird that you look at and just briefly explain its migration pattern and therefore how it comes to be in our country, in agricultural regions, having touched other places where diseases might be picked up?
Bird migration is wild. There's this kind of bird called a bar-tailed godwit, if you've never heard about it.
Sorry, a bar-tailed?
Bar-tailed godwit, okay? They're like this big. They are found in mudflats here in Australia in the summertime. During our winter, they are in Alaska. And then they take off from Alaska and they fly over the open ocean for about 10 days. And then they turn up in New Zealand and in Australia. It's 10,000 kilometers. It kind of hurts my brain how they can do this because they're this big.
This bird's not landing on the way.
No, so these guys are doing it non-stop. But
Wow.
we, of course, also have migratory birds that stop in lots of places on the way.
Yes.
So one of the birds that I work on, it's called a red-necked stint. It weighs the same amount as a tim tam. It breeds in Siberia and then spends the summer here with us. And it stops in lots of places along the way, including the Yellow Sea in China and Southeast Asia before coming here. And so those are important interfaces for things like avian influenza because these birds are stopping in places where we know that this virus is. So they could potentially bring the virus with them on their migrations.
Yeah. I love that we've got a bird this big that can fly from Alaska to Australia, and we're celebrating being able to fly non-stop from Perth to London these days. It's like, go humans. We're really nailing this innovation. Mary, that migratory pattern of birds can bring diseases and pests into our country. And tell us a little bit about the recent outbreaks of avian influenza in Australia and how we think that arrived in the country.
Sure. The unique parts about Australia and the avian virus sort of ecology means that the outbreaks that we've had in 2024 and 2025 and in the past have actually been uniquely Australian. So these viruses have actually evolved over time in the Australian context so that they tend to be low pathogenic and they the way that they transmit is through multiple generations and then they change into a highly pathogenic form.
Yes.
So we do see some global interactions when these birds come through, but it's a very slow kind of evolution and it's influenced by the Australian viral ecology. However, obviously we've had quite significant impacts in both 2024 and 2025. So where over 2.4 million birds in the layer sector had to be destroyed as part of the response to these. When I first joined and came into this job, one of the first challenges that we faced was the biggest avian influenza outbreak in 2024. So 3 separate incursions or 3 separate spillovers in 3 jurisdictions in 3 weeks.
Yes.
So that was a record in terms of the scale of the spillover and infection. So,
And then the strategy from there, you've identified its containment, destruction,
correct.
Disposal, cleaning, rebuild.
So Australia is one of the really unique countries in the world in that we've got an excellent disease preparedness strategy. It's called the AusVet Plan, and that's subscribed to by all the jurisdictions, so state jurisdictions, Commonwealth and industry, and it's a pre-agreed set of response plans. So we know exactly what to do when an outbreak occurs. So it's an agreement that everyone has hashed out and gone through multiple versions and revised time and time again so that we know exactly what to do.
What do you think you did best as an industry to control the outbreak once it had been discovered, and what would you change next time?
In terms of from an industry perspective, so I represent the broiler or the chicken meat sector. We were minimally impacted. It was predominantly the layer sector that had the most number of birds being impacted. However, we all work together as a country, including with all the jurisdictions and Commonwealth, to look at how do we rapidly depopulate the birds to try and reduce the risk to the wider population.
Yes.
So that's about how do we contain and control the disease, eradicate it as quickly and cost effectively as possible,
Yes.
so that it doesn't go beyond that.
Yep. And did you eradicate it as quickly as possible?
We did.
Yep.
As we've done many, many times before, we got on top of it very quickly.
Yep.
So.
Okay. Joe, in the red meat industry, do you look at what happened with these avian influenza outbreaks and how it was dealt with, and analyse, are there any lessons from that for the red meat industry?
Look, I think that's a constant thing that across sectors we're doing, is actively working with industry and government and making sure that there is that investment in learning, preparing. Obviously for the red meat sector, I guess with foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin disease up in Indonesia, that was really a big call to action for the red meat industry about, are we actually ready, I guess on our doorstep. And so I think that continual reminder that we can't just sit back and relax. We've got to be looking at what's the next thing that we need to be doing, making sure that everyone understands, what your role, your responsibility is, so that we can be prepared. And I think importantly, learning when these incidents happen, when the issues arise. Obviously, there's a big focus on the response, but equally a need to reflect on what are the learnings, what can we take from here to make sure that we're better prepared next time.
Yep. Brand, how much is it with these things like lumpy skin disease turning up in Indonesia? How much should we be investing as the first line of defence really being our neighbours, rather than waiting for it to get here and take hold? Are we investing the right amount and in the right things in helping our near neighbours deal with this?
Yeah, so we tend to look at biosecurity as a continuum, so that pre-border, at-border and post-border. So ideally, the more you can invest and manage pre-border offshore means that you're preventing or minimising the likelihood of it coming onshore. So that strategic partnerships we have with our near neighbours is vital. So the work we did with Indonesia, providing supplies of vaccines, because vaccines are really important for the managing the spread of disease, the laboratory capability, the on-ground practical elements around responses is really important. So we work really closely with our counterparts to maintain the surveillance in those areas and then trying to help manage those diseases offshore. That said, we're also looking at, well, what would it look like onshore and what are the sorts of things we need to do? So we have modelled some of the likely entry pathways. So for lumpy skin disease, it's a vector, so an insect-transmitted disease. And so we're looking at where are those insect populations, what are the prevailing winds. So we've done some work with CSIRO around modelling to seeing where those prevailing winds are, what sort of numbers of insects would we need, how would they then come into contact with animals here in Australia, and then what would we need to do about that. So it's quite a complex, dynamic approach. But that offshore capacity building and engagement with our near neighbours is absolutely vital.
Yeah. I'm interested in, so that work with CSIRO around how would that vector arrive with specific winds and so forth. What do you do with that information? Is that then when certain wind conditions occur, you're on high alert in certain regions? Is it that certain parts of Australia know that's the most likely entry point? What's done with that research?
Yeah, so I guess it's a modular approach. So we're looking at, we look at a lot of pathways of entry. So we talk about regulated pathways, so that's when they come in through trade routes, either on animals, animal products, cargo and the like, or unregulated pathways. So they're things that we can't control per se, so windborne or migratory birds and the like. So what it does give us an indication is where are the likely entry points. So we may then want to concentrate our surveillance activities in those locations. We can't look everywhere all the time. And so if we can see spreads of disease and as they're occurring in countries, and then likely entry points, then we can work with our jurisdictions and industries to say, well, actually, we think these are some of the hotspots, these are some of the areas that we might need to focus more on, so that we can then mobilise to respond as quick as we can, because speed to action is going to be really important when and as outbreaks occur.
Yeah. Michelle, those sorts of technologies and research to deploy it, do you see that in the wild bird space, or are we doing some good research on the patterns of migration, where disease is likely to come from, and deploying technology to assist us with that?
Yeah, I actually just want to add one thing to your comment from before that wasn't mentioned was, I think it's not only about doing surveillance and capacity building in our nearest neighbours, but that data sharing framework is really critical. So for us in Australia, for both wild birds and industry, it's really critical that we actually know what our nearest neighbours are finding, how common that is, what the patterns of spread are, because that helps us with, for example, some of the models that CSIRO are doing. And so one of the challenges in the avian influenza space that we have, for example, is that not all of our nearest neighbours are reporting their data to the World Organization for Animal Health.
Yep.
And so when we sit and do risk assessments for wild birds, thinking about our Tim Tam birds that land in Southeast Asia before they come here, we don't really know what they're seeing in some of our nearest neighbour countries because they're not necessarily reporting those data internationally. We know they're generating it, but they're not openly sharing it. So that makes those risk assessments and spread mapping very difficult.
Interesting. And what stands in the way of sharing that? Is that a trust thing, a systems thing?
Look, I think data sharing is extremely complex, and many different people have different reasons for choosing not to share data. Trust is certainly an extremely important part of that. And so trust that the data is going to be used responsibly and interpreted correctly, and that the original data generators will be credited for that work are things that we often hear.
Yes.
But we have a responsibility to work with the countries around us to build better trust, to be able to get that information, to be able to better predict what could happen.
If you had all the power I could grant you, no, I can't grant you any power, all the power you could be granted by the world, how would you solve that problem?
God, I have absolutely no idea. Sorry, that's a really big open-ended question.
And power is intoxicating.
Look, I don't think it's about power, and I don't think it's about money. I think it's about building trust and working together. I think it's about thinking as a global community rather than thinking about it as a state or a country issue.
Yes.
Like, this is our data generated by our state from our money, so we will only share it. We need to think about this as a global community because diseases spread, they evolve, they emerge. What happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas. And so if you were giving me all the power in the world, it would probably be to help people think more global-oriented rather than insular.
Okay, and this comes back to those tensions we were talking about on this stage just earlier today. I think one of them was speed versus trust and how quickly can we move. But we have a pretty urgent issue, is my understanding, with potential risks around avian influenza coming in through wild birds. Yet we need to build trust over time until anyone will actually share the data that you're telling me and makes sense is pretty integral to managing that risk. How long is it going to take to build that trust? I mean,
it's not a linear process. And so we have seen in Australia and internationally that trust builds and then trust falls. It depends on lots of things. I think in Australia, in the wild bird space, working with state governments, we've done a really great job of building trust in kind of peacetime between outbreaks. The 2024 outbreaks for me were a really great example of people coming together to work closely together in a really trusted environment to get excellent outcomes. In some of the other sort of committees and spaces I work in, we have seen people start with lots of trust and that fray. This ultimately is a human game. We need to figure out how to work together and how to come up with sets of rules that work for everyone that are not too rule-based. And so it requires a time investment and goodwill, lots and lots of goodwill.
Yeah. Can I add to that? So I think it's a really important point. And for us, one of the things that we think is important, as Michelle said in peacetime, is building trust across not just sectors, but with the research sectors and with our near neighbours and counterparts. So it's really multifactorial. It has to be about, how do we help those countries as much as ourselves? So it's not just we're doing it for our own vested interests. It's about capacity building in those countries is really key, because then they have some sovereignty and means to support their own drivers for food security and economic development. So it's not just a single piece of string connected to another piece. It's genuinely complex web. And I think if we look at these things in isolation, I think that's where it becomes problematic. And we've seen that in the past, where a lot of goodwill has gone into a certain action without really thinking about, well, what does that mean in 3, 5 or 10 years' time? So putting those steps in place now and thinking about what's the outcome we all want to achieve collectively, and nothing has mobilised us better than H5N1, because it's got a human health, environmental health, agriculture, which meant that as government we were able to mobilise $100 million in preparedness, which is really hard, because that's something that governments often respond to things as they're right in front of you. But one thing we did is, what are some practical means to front load some funding and effort to states and territories, to working with Mary and the Chicken Meat Federation, or with industry or other groups, is really sort of building that over time. And maintaining those connections, because we're all in it sort of together. I know it sounds a bit sort of la-di-da, but if we don't think that way, and either government charges on the head or industry or others, and we're not really connecting, then we don't get the best outcome.
That's very interesting. I wrote down, actually, Ollie referred me to a report he'd just come across by the CEO of the Egg Farmers of Australia, Melinda Hashimoto, who went to Japan to look at the way they manage H5 avian influenza. And one of the quotes I wrote down was, "Trust and transparency protect markets just as much as fences," which is very much, I think, what you're saying. And it keeps coming up, and it seems, if I can just make a bigger statement, it just highlights how important it is as an individual, as a region, as a company, as a country, to behave in a trustworthy manner over time, so you don't wait till you have a problem you have to solve and then say, well, now we have to build the trust so people will share stuff with us. You hopefully, you build the trust over time, and when things get difficult, you cash in on that trust so that people are willing to share. And it's a bit devastating to see what some countries are doing internationally at the moment to destroy trust built up over hundreds of years.
Tim, can I also just add to that? I think it's important to recognise that there are already quite significant trust networks that we, as Australia, are really clearly involved in. So even for avian influenza, for example, we are involved in a program called OFFLU. So that is where a global network of collaborators come together and share a lot of genomic data. So, we are talking to an ag tech audience. There is a lot of work being done in that sort of genomic whole genome sequencing, a lot of tech looking at the sort of how the virus evolves over time. And that data is shared globally. So, and I've obviously seen Michelle in action in international conferences and forums where, again, it's both a formal and an informal network of information sharing. So I think those trust networks are built, but they're also strengthened over time with government and industry and research academics along the way. So.
Where else do you see the most promising technology for helping your industry in the quest to keep disease out or trace it, eradicate quickly?
So for us, we break it into a couple of different sections. One very big area is around biosecurity. Obviously, the investments that we load up on biosecurity, that is almost like our insurance program. It prevents the disease, and that's a better spend for buck around trying to keep the disease out. And then the other area that we look at is around how do we try and control the disease if it comes in, how do we quickly and effectively eliminate that from our system. So in my mind, that there's two sort of very big groups of spend. So one of the key things that the industry, for example, has looked at on the biosecurity side is about how do we stop that intersect between wild birds and commercial poultry. That is the biggest area. When we look through all the research globally, internationally, lots of countries have done epidemiological studies around their rates of infection and how they were introduced. And it's all about that interaction between wild birds and commercial birds. So we've relied a lot on looking at those international kind of work to inform how we manage our biosecurity. And so we've made a number of recommendations throughout the industry, in addition to our normal, biosecurity guidelines. So I think it's important to note things like within the agri-future sort of space, there have been investments in the last couple of years around traceability, about how do we bring in restrictions or controls around movement so that we know exactly who's going to what farm, what sort of risk factors are coming into farm, how do we stop those high-risk movements. So those are all really important areas to look at from a biosecurity perspective.
Can I just ask for a specific example of a technology, if you're most interested in, or one of the key things is interface between wild birds and the industry. What's a technology that you're excited about that might be able to help in that space?
Well, we've seen some really exciting things like in the last couple of years around bird deterrence, for example. We've seen lasers being installed on dams that actively, they don't actually shoot out lasers, they shoot out sound beams or high frequency sort of beams that deters the wild birds from settling onto ponds. And that is a critical part of trying to reduce that interaction. Other things that are not, so sexy, but, even putting balls onto ponds to restrict, again, the surface water, that is a very effective deterrent. We put netting on our free range. So again, it stops that interaction between the wild birds and the domestic birds.
Michelle, what about technologies, or do you see AI playing a role in managing the data that we do have, or at least enabling you to work with it and get more information that can help us manage disease risk coming in?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that. One is technology and one is AI. We'll just start with the technology point. I think there is a huge scope for technological innovation in the diagnostic space. So, for example, I go and do surveillance for avian influenza in Antarctica in a place where there are no labs.
So you go down there?
I go down there and I find birds, and how am I going to test them because I don't have a lab? And so finding these really cool technological innovations for rapid testing or in-field testing or lab in a suitcase, I think there's huge scope for that. And if you think about even poultry outbreaks, how do you get the testing done faster rather than funneling all these samples to have to go to a courier, to have to go to a state laboratory? I think there's a lot of space for technological innovation there. In terms of AI, like I see it with my rose-lined glasses in a few years that we could just have all these incredible integrated dashboards which are bringing in all kinds of data. So for example, research that we have done has shown that there is a relationship between H7 outbreaks and rainfall with a really interesting time lag. And we've revisited this a few times, but we have to actually sit down, query the data, and do the study. Wouldn't it just be cool if AI was just automatically generating a sort of an outbreak risk interface or an index or something like that? So I think these sort of agentic AIs that you can give tasks to, build dashboards, integrate data, like you just take your data straight from the qPCR machine. I think there's going to be a lot of development in the space. There's been some early work done I've seen, which is really flash and really cool. So yeah, really excited for the future. I think it's going to change everything of what we know about sort of the traditional just qPCR and sending of reports to somebody and that being that.
So your world could look quite different in 5 years in terms of we build the trust, we share the data, you bring in the technological capabilities and AI, and you and your colleagues could be delivering something completely different to the industry.
How cool could that be? Like, what a great thing that we could
We're
try
banking
to get
on you,
to.
Michelle.
Oh, that's a lot.
How cool will it be? Let's use empowering language.
I think there's a lot of really exciting work being done in this space.
And on that, I mean, that's absolutely right. The diagnostic stuff is going to be the big game changer for us. And we're supporting some of that work at the federal government level around point of care testing, so those rapid antigen tests that we all loved in COVID times, up the nose. But it is really important. It's an important screening tool. So the other thing we have to be also mindful of is that the PCRs are still going to need to be there as a sort of endpoint around that confirmatory testing, because what we don't want to have is a situation where we put a screening test forward, we get a false positive, and from a trade perspective, or a false negative, yeah. But if it was a false positive and we have to have declared freedom from a certain disease, that could immediately shut trade down, which could have a tens of millions of dollars impact. But it doesn't mean we need to be scared for it. And on the data question, I mean, maybe I might be a bit flippant on this, but I think the data sharing issue is more of a mindset issue. When you actually look at the constraints that people put forward, I think a lot of it can be overcome. I mean, and there's definitely privacy issues. There's a whole range of legitimate reasons why it's hard, but I genuinely think that there are more reasons why we can do it rather than we can't. And the real-time data and the dashboards to make myself as decision makers being able to make the best decision I can with the information I have at the time. We're going to be making the decisions anyway. Yep. So if we can have better information to decide what we do, and jurisdictions and industry, that will put us in a far better position.
Yeah. And Joe, with NLIS, you're investing quite a bit at the moment in reconfiguring that. And what would you aspirationally like to be able to do with that data 5 years from now?
Yeah, and data, I guess, is a real priority for us. We sit on behalf of industry, we're the custodians of really rich data sets. So, NLIS for cattle, sheep and goats, it's been in place since 2000. We've got a vast amount of information in there that is really supporting us from a biosecurity and a market access perspective. But I think that the flip side is obviously how can we leverage that data, connect that data, work with other parties to help with the preparedness, to help with that sort of forward view of where the risks might be arising so that action can be taken early. But I think importantly for the people who are sharing that data and providing that data, it's about how do we actually create more value. So back to industry, there's a lot of work in terms of, I guess, contributing to these systems. But there's a lot of value add that I think we can place as well in terms of better utilising that data and connecting data sets so that industry can actually draw more value out of it as well. So I think AI is a big potential. I'm kind of with you, Brent. I think it's probably more of a mindset challenge for us rather than a practical challenge to overcome in terms of connecting and sharing data.
Yep.
In a world that I see, maybe 5, 10, maybe more years. I think it's about how do we use technology in a way that removes the overhead, the burden in terms of collecting that data. So if there are ways in which we can leverage technology to actually automate those processes, think about traceability, for example, in a different way. Can we be using technology to give us the forward view rather than retrospectively looking at the data that we've got to work out what those patterns might be? So huge amount of opportunity, a little way to go.
We have 5 minutes to go, and I'm keen to give each of you the opportunity to ask or draw the attention to this room to one thing you'd like to leave them with or ask from them. We have producers here, we have startups, we have investors, we have government, we have food, we have processing. What is one thing that you'd like to draw their attention to or ask from them as a call of action? Please, if we could start, Mary, and work our way down.
For me, it's about ensuring that the solution being offered actually addresses the problems of the industry. So we don't want solutions that are looking for a home. We want there to be a really good, strong collaboration with the industry at the ground level so that we actually design solutions that are fit for purpose.
And how do you tell them your problems to ensure that?
Absolutely. So it's about how do you get in on the ground level and actually finding out and having those conversations with the producers, with the growers, so that you get in at that ground level to understand the industry better and to actually then figure out what are our actual problems. So it's not... The poultry industry is very unique. So, and I'm sure every sector says that, but chicken meat is very unique, and it has its own idiosyncrasies and nuances, and it's about understanding having long-term partnerships with industry to understand what our needs are and how they evolve over
Yep.
time. And again, it comes down to that grassroots engagement and understanding what our actual needs are. Yep.
Thank you, Mary. Michelle?
Yeah, so I think I sort of preface this by saying that I come from the university system, which is quite different from my colleagues here. And one of the things that we struggle the most with actually is funding. Mary and I were just talking about it here. So we are really interested in doing work that can support industry or support government decision making, do surveillance, build cool, innovative things. But one of our great shortcomings is always funding.
Yes.
So if you have opportunity for funding, I'd love to talk to you afterwards.
Yes, and I don't know if you got to see the session earlier, but John Brumby made the same point, that we are woefully underinvesting in research across the board.
Yeah.
So that's a good reminder as to one place where this is going to cause issues if we're underfunded. Yep. Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think is important for government, and we know government is probably 10 or 20 years behind the tech sector, is in order to sort of solve the problems, as Mary has said, it doesn't have to be a big bang sort of technological solution that's going to fix a big issue. I'm actually more, I spend more time focusing on the iterations of multiple technologies that can be tested and trialled in smaller areas to then the cumulative impact of that. So we talk about, the Kaizen principle with the Japanese car makers. It's those kind of, how do we aggregate some of those technologies in ways that are solving the real world problems that we've talked about with surveillance, with data and diagnostics, in a way that can be used and fit for purpose. Because too often I think we have this thing over here which is great, but it's like a small, round peg in a square hole. Yep. And so for us in government, we have a lot of challenges with legislation and with a whole range of things. So it's really just about how do you build with the system that you've got to leverage that, build it out, to gain the trust that we can use these technologies safely, that actually helps get that end point. So I think it's more about cumulative impacts of different types of technologies, how they've been used and in what way, to help integrate that into the system that we have, because it doesn't just switch overnight.
Yeah. Joe?
Look, and I guess I come from a lens where our largest user base, livestock producers, and so thinking about how do we better manage risks on farm, leveraging technology that is user friendly. So it's got to be there and designed to solve a problem that is going to add value at the farm level. And I think it's critically important that, because we have a whole of industry, all of our ag sectors that have equal challenges, that we're thinking about how do we design to make sure that what we're delivering to our livestock producers, our broader ag sector, works for them, but is still helping us to achieve those broader national objectives.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to please thank 4 people who are not only here on the panel and leading us in interesting discussion, but working to keep our industry safe, which is so important to our commercial viability and ability to produce food going forward. So please thank Mary Wu, Brian Smith, Michelle Weil and Joe Quigley. Thank you very much.